Welcome back to Proxhammer, everybody, and today we're going to be revamping series I did on the channel a while back, but I wanted to give it a new spin because we're now in Nephilim and a lot has changed. We've gotten a lot of new codexes from other armies and so forth. The meta has shifted, and I feel like now is a good time to revamp the series and give you guys a current look at my picks for the Eldar Heavy Support category. So this is a series that I actually plan on doing semi-frequently, just depending on how the meta shifts. I know that, units come in and out of fashion a lot, but oftentimes that can be directly related to new codex releases and new rules slates and new nerfs and buffs and things like that. So this is for November 2022, and this is going to be pretty much the tier list that we're going to be going over right before the changes come in January. So I'm actually hoping to get all these done by January so that we can do a new set of tier lists when the new points, nerfs, or buffs come out. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. So a quick overview of what we're going to be doing in this video. We're going to be doing an analysis of where our heavy support units are in the current meta, accounting for the release of the several new codexes and the balanced data slates in Nephilim. And just a quick disclaimer for everybody, I know that obviously these picks are not definitive, right? So these are just my opinions based on my own experience and analysis of the rules and matchups in the current state of the game. And of course, I think it goes without saying that these are by no means definitive placements. Everybody has their own opinion of different units. You guys might actually think that the units belong in different places or that units are worse or better than they are. I know that some of my placements on here might be a little bit controversial in the highest tiers of competitive play. But again, I try to give you guys an honest opinion and I try to give you guys a balanced opinion as well. So let's go and take a look at the tier list. So before we begin, I do want to mention kind of what the tiers actually mean and how I'm defining each unit, because I think this is important, right? We need to make sure that when I'm putting units in their correct tiers, that I'm also defining what each tier actually means, right? So S tier is going to be top of the line and best in slot for most competitive builds. A tier is going to be a great unit and extremely effective in the role. B tier is going to be a pretty solid unit, but has some minor issues or is outcompeted by others. C tier is going to be a weaker unit and has some more serious issues involved. And then, of course, D tier is going to be a really weak unit that needs a lot of help or investment to be anywhere close to effective. And so the first unit up is the support weapons, and the support weapons are going to go in S tier. Now, when I talk about support weapons, I'm really only talking about the D cannon being S tier. The Shadow Weaver is also decent for its points, but if it was just a Shadow Weaver, it'd probably be closer to B or C tier, to be honest. Probably B tier, though, just because of its cost. However, the D cannon is absolutely the best in slot damage versus vehicles and monsters, and it has good damage against other targets as well, including Terminators and things like that that are harder infantry targets. D cannons just absolutely decimate. D cannons also ignore line of sight, giving them extra versatility and allowing them to target threats that you normally would not be able to get to. And lastly, the D cannon deals mortal wounds, which make it a good choice against opponents with invulnerable saves and, of course, the dreaded demonic save. So here's the thing about D cannons that I think are really powerful, is that against a lot of the new armies that are coming out and a lot of the new codexes, D cannons have remained one of the most solid choices for heavy support in our codex. And you can't really say that about a lot of the other choices. For example, demons, right? Demons have that dreaded demonic save. A lot of our heavy support choices struggle versus dealing with that kind of demonic save. But again, D cannons don't really care about this because not only do they deal mortal wounds, but they have a high enough volume of anti-tank, anti-monster firepower that can really get through those hard targets. So again, especially against demons, this unit really blasts through that demonic save and makes it very difficult for any kind of huge demonic target to survive. Whether it be a Bloodthirster or whether it be Bellicor himself, it's going to be really hard for them to take one or two full charges of D cannons. And especially if those D cannons are part of the Uthway Craftworld, you're getting +1 to hit, you're getting rerolls of 1 to hit with both of those stratagems because, they are Guardian units. And it's just, they're very powerful. And I think a lot of people, when the Codex first came out, kind of wrote D cannons off, myself included, because I saw other options. I saw Fire Prisms, and of course the new Demon Codex wasn't out yet, so Fire Prisms seemed like the logical choice. Support weapons were really under the radar, especially since Hail of Doom was running rampant in the meta. Not a lot of people were taking a look at support weapons, but I knew that when Nephilim came out and I saw that Uthway was going to be a more powerful Craftworld, that support weapons were going to be an absolute monster of a unit. And of course, now they are. Now they're widely considered in the competitive Eldar community as one of the best heavy supports for the slot. So that's why I went ahead and put it in S tier, because it is truly a excellent unit that deals with a lot of the new threats from the new codexes very efficiently, and honestly, they're a lot of fun to use, I have to say. Even despite all the special rules and all the good things they have, they are just really satisfying to shoot. There's nothing better than rolling those dice, and if you roll a little bit hot and you get 3 dice for each D cannon to hit, it just feels really good to just set that loose upon something like Bellicor or a Bloodthirster. It just feels really satisfying to do that. So D cannons, best in slot in my opinion, S tier for sure. And following up on the excellent D cannon is the Night Spinner. And the Night Spinner is really just, I wish the Night Spinner was good, because it used to be one of my absolute favorite models to use. Back in 5th edition, when the rules were revamped and came out for it again, I absolutely loved immobilizing vehicles with that thing. It was amazing. Making units move through difficult terrain and dangerous terrain was absolutely hilarious. But of course, in its current iteration, it really just doesn't do a lot. It has really weak damage against armored infantry, and it wastes damage against light infantry because it is damage too. So you're wasting efficiency either way. And it really suffered from the nerfs to indirect fire against pretty much all infantry targets. And in addition, it's really expensive for what it does. It's 145 points, and it will almost never make up its points cost against the targets it's supposed to be good against. And this may be a little controversial. Obviously, I knew that the Night Spinner was better before the indirect fire nerfs, and now it's just, I would say it's definitely a C tier, and sometimes even I would consider it a D tier unit in certain cases against certain opponents. But I really have to say, the Night Spinner never really impressed me with the new codex. When the codex came out and I looked at the Night Spinner's profile, I was really extremely disappointed in it. It just didn't seem to do a whole lot of damage for its cost. And having indirect fire on such a mobile platform seemed like kind of a waste. And the fact that it had no other special rules besides just being a blast weapon really, well, it was a little bit upsetting, I have to be honest. Especially since the Night Spinner should be, having some utility or something like that, debuffing enemies in some way like it used to, and it just didn't. So I have to say the Night Spinner, its current state of the rules, is a very weak unit, and I would have to put it in C tier just due to the fact that it's not really efficient against any of the targets it's supposed to be good against. So definitely a C tier unit. And on to our next unit, the Fire Prism. So the Fire Prism is actually a unit that I, before the new codexes came out, considered an S tier unit. And the reason I considered it S tier was because the Fire Prism was exceptionally good at destroying hard targets with invulnerable saves. So units like the Tyranid Harpy, the Hive Tyrant, and things like that. Really big threats from the Tyranid Codex that would often have a 4+ invul save on any given turn. So being able to ignore this was extremely important in being able to shut down the key Tyranid targets before they got into range of your units. However, now that the new Demon Codex has come out and we've had things like the demonic save introduced, the Fire Prism in my mind has fallen off quite a bit, just because of the fact that the linked fire stratagem cannot ignore the demonic save. So even though the Fire Prism has fantastic focus damage against vehicles and monsters and can ignore invul saves with the multiple Prism linked fire stratagem, unfortunately, it doesn't do all that well against demons, as it doesn't ignore the demonic save, and honestly, demons are running the tournament scene right now. So with all that in mind, I really have to give the Fire Prism A tier. And I still think it's a fantastic unit, don't get me wrong. I just think against the demon matchup, it's so bad that honestly, I can't rank it as a best in slot, because when you compare it with something like the D-Cannons are good against pretty much any enemy out there. They're going to be able to destroy heavy targets no matter what army you're fighting. Whereas the Fire Prism is really not going to be able to do its job against Chaos Demon monsters. And to give you guys a little bit of an example on this, 2 Fire Prisms linking up their fire against Be'lakor really would be lucky to even get one shot through to them. And that's a large investment of points for something that may or may not do something every turn. And that's just, to me, that's not enough. If you compare it to something like support weapons are going to take Be'lakor basically to half health in one blast. And if you're lucky, they may even wipe him out completely with a few command points. And even though D-Cannons don't really quite have the range Fire Prisms do, they do have indirect fire, and they do mortal wounds. So they do a lot more against demons, and they do a lot better against other matchups as well. So overall, Fire Prism's still strong. I still love it with the Bealtan Craftworld. I still think it's a solid choice, but it just struggles so badly against demons. I have trouble, justifying that it's in the same league as D-Cannons now. And then, of course, comes the Falcon. Now, the Falcon I ended up putting in S tier because basically the Falcon is one of those units that in and of itself, it doesn't do a lot of damage, but its special rules are so powerful and give you so much utility on the battlefield in a number of situations that in my book, it's an S tier unit. So here's what the Falcon can do for you. First of all, it gives you fantastic alpha strike potential turn 1 for units that would normally not be able to threaten enemies until turn 2. So for example, units like Howling Banshees or Fire Dragons, which your opponent would normally target right off the bat if they were in a Wave Serpent, and possibly kill with some of the weaponry that exists out there. Instead, you get the Alpha Strike on them. So your Fire Dragons or Howling Banshees can either charge in or shoot without fear of, mostly without fear of retaliation, right? And if your opponent has a lot of kind of screening units or any kind of Auspex scan or anything like that, you can always deploy it normally on the battlefield, and you really don't lose much over a Wave Serpent to do it. And in addition, the Falcon does great damage for being a transport, having a pulse laser, which is basically, in my opinion, a slightly superior Bright Lance, especially against a lot of the newer heavy armor that are coming out, including Toughness 9 vehicles, which the pulse laser does do better against. And it has versatile choice of weapon. Remember, it gets to choose another weapon on the platform. You can choose a Bright Lance if you want to go more anti-tank, or of course you can just go cheap with a scatter laser. It's really up to you. And again, you can deploy it however you want. You can deploy it on the board if you need to, if the enemy has Auspex scan, or if the enemy has a lot of screening units, or you can simply deep strike it and potentially kill something very threatening on turn 1. So the Falcon, in my mind, is a fantastic inclusion to a lot of army lists, and I consider it a best in slot, especially in a third slot. And in some cases, like some of the lists I've run, like the Mobile Fighters Webway Warriors list, you maybe want to run 3 of them with units inside. It can be very effective. So I actually do think this is an S tier unit as well. And then coming up next is Dark Reapers. So Dark Reapers, I could go on forever about Dark Reapers. In fact, I did a whole video about how I want Dark Reapers to be reworked because they're so bad. So here's the thing about Dark Reapers. I really like the models. They're really cool. I've always liked Dark Reapers. They were one of my favorite units in 4th edition, bar none. I remember killing entire squads of Marines with just the Exarch. Not even just the squad, but just the Exarch. And these guys were also good last edition in our last book as well, with the different stratagems and things that we could do with Dark Reapers. In this current edition, even though they got new models, they are absolutely awful. And the reason why is because they're really expensive with very lackluster damage. If you compare their damage point for point with any other damage-dealing aspect warrior in the Codex, they come out on bottom. The other thing is that they're very fragile and they have no battle focus and are pretty much very easily exposed in a lot of situations. So they need direct line of sight in most cases, unless the Exarch has a Tempest Launcher. But even then, the Tempest Launcher isn't the Doom weapon that it used to be. So you're going to want to have line of sight for the most part, and this makes them a really easy target, and they're pretty fragile. And also, on the downside, they're not very mobile. They get a -1 to hit modifier for moving and shooting. They don't even ignore that anymore, unless you pay a bunch of extra points for the XR power. And they're just really slow. I mean, they're slower than normal Eldar units. Their movement's 6. They don't have battle focus. They're just really easily picked apart and killed. Now, there are a couple of ways to run them better, and I do have a video on this on my channel of how to maximize the effectiveness of your Dark Reapers if you really like the unit and want them to be good. But again, it does require a lot of attention and a lot of support. So in their current state, I think Dark Reapers, unfortunately, are about at the same level as the Night Spinner. They really just don't do the damage for their points. And on a worse note, unlike the Night Spinner, they're very fragile and easily killed. So Dark Reapers firmly belong in my opinion, C tier. And lastly, bringing up the rear, we have Warwalkers. So Warwalkers are a very powerful unit, and I think they belong in A tier. Now, the reason I don't think they belong in S tier is because I don't really think they compete with the Falcon for versatility or the D cannon in raw damage, but what they don't have in those categories, they make up for with versatility. They're a very versatile shooting platform with a lot of different weapon options. They have the advanced position special rule, which allows them to get into positions where they can draw line of sight on enemies that normally they would be not able to do so with, right, on turn 1. So a lot of enemies like to hide behind obscuring terrain turn 1, and Warwalkers can use advanced positions to get line of sight on those enemies and get a quick alpha strike on them. They also have really decent durability with a 5+ invul save, which when combined with Strands of Fate can keep them alive in the first couple turns of the game. However, I think their drawback is they're a bit on the expensive side and they don't have core. So why is this a big deal? Well, I think Warwalkers have trouble hitting. I know that seems really awkward to say because Warwalkers have a decent ballistic skill, but compared to other Eldar units, they kind of have trouble hitting their targets. And they don't really get a lot of rerolls. So let me give you a quick example. Both support weapons and also, by the way, Falcons, or at least I should say the unit that is inside the Falcon, is typically going to have access to some sort of reroll. So whether that be the Black Guardian stratagem or whether that be the rerolls ones to hit, I think it's called Martial Citizenry or something like that for the support weapons. Or with the Falcon, the unit inside can get Guide, can get Doom, is basically going to be able to benefit from all those things. The Warwalkers, unfortunately, don't get a lot of rerolls. Outside of certain Craftworld traits like the Bealtan, who get 1 reroll to hit per unit, or the Uthway, who get 1 reroll to wound per unit. So outside of that, they really don't get a lot of rerolls, and if you're going to be putting them in vulnerable positions early on to play to one of their main strengths, which is the fact that they can draw line of sight to enemies that are behind obscuring terrain, then you really need to make sure that they do the job that turn, which means buffs, right? Make sure they can reroll to hit or wound. And unfortunately, they just can't do this. So even though on average rolls you should be fine because they have a 3+ to hit, you never really know sometimes. Dice gods be damned or be praised. Sometimes you're going to roll those 6 bright lances and you're going to get only 1 hit. And at that point, you're going to really wish that the Warwalkers were core. Because at that point, they're probably going to be pretty exposed. You're probably going to have to use command points to do a fire and fade or something like that to get them out of there in an emergency. And you're just not going to be getting the most out of your unit that game. And you're probably going to be quickly dispatched at that point. So again, Warwalkers very powerful. They should be really good on the Alpha Strike, but because they don't have rerolls, they don't have the exact reliability, I think, that support weapons do when it comes to dealing with hard targets. Now, as for the other options that you can give the Warwalker, I know scatter lasers is also an important option, and you're not going to whiff as badly with scatter lasers because they have way more shots, right? They have 6 shots apiece. But again, scatter lasers are really good, don't get me wrong, but there's cheaper options for this, right? And when it comes to scatter lasers, you can afford, for pretty much the same price as 3 Warwalkers, you can afford 5 Shroud Runners, and even though they have 1 less scatter laser, they have 5 additional Ranger long rifle shots. They're faster, they're more maneuverable. their core so they can get rerolls and buffs and things like that. So again, great unit. I think definitely an A tier unit. It's very effective in a lot of matchups, solid choice. But unfortunately, I just don't think it quite reaches S tier. Now, if Warwalkers get core, which I hope they get in the upcoming rules changes that are coming in January, I think they would easily be an S tier unit. Easily, without a doubt. Being able to put guide on them, being able to be affected by doom and things like that would just make Warwalkers so effective, I think, that they would be an S tier unit comparable with the Falcon and, of course, support weapons. All right, and with that, that's the end of our tier list. We have 2 units in S tier, that is the D Cannon and the Falcon. We have 2 units in A tier, that is the Fire Prism and Warwalker. No units in B tier, and in C tier, we have the Night Spinner and the Dark Reapers. So just a bit of a thing to go out on this. Pretty soon, later this week, I'm going to be doing a video on my predictions about what needs to be changed about the Eldar Codex in January. And in this video, I'm going to be talking a little bit about which units I think really need a buff. And I'm telling you, some of the units that I think need a buff are on this tier list. So Dark Reapers, I definitely think need a buff, although I don't trust GW enough to actually do a real rework, which is what they need. They'll probably just decrease their points, hopefully by 10, but probably just by 5. And then as for the Night Spinner, I do think the Night Spinner also deserves a points decrease or some kind of special utility buff to its weapon. Maybe its weapon hits units and debuffs their speed or something like that, right? Debuffs their movement. Hopefully the Night Spinner gets something like that, but we'll see. We'll just have to see. But later this week, I'm going to be coming out with that video, so stay tuned. And I'm also going to be coming out with more tier lists. I think the next tier list we're going to be doing is fast attack. So pretty excited about that. I think a lot of our fast attack options are really cool. And I have a couple of new ideas about where to place some of those units. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today. I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one. And again, leave a comment in the comment section if you agree or disagree with any of my choices. I'd love to hear why you guys think the way you do. And yeah, leave a comment. All right, see you guys later, everybody. Have a good one. Peace out.